Well, hello there, and welcome to a very special edition of Telile 24/7. I'm your host, Adam Cook, and we have a lot to celebrate this week. Not only is this the 4th anniversary of Telile 24/7 going on the air, this is also our 150th episode, and this is the 30th anniversary year for Telile Community Television itself. So, we thought we should invite somebody to join the party and help us commemorate all of these things while talking about what it's like to cover local news for a community television station. And what better person to do that than someone who has been a guest on Telile 24/7 before? She is the news director for CHCO-TV in St. Andrews, New Brunswick, and she is, like myself, a fellow member of the Local Journalism Initiative, or LJI, as monitored by the Canadian Association of Community Television Users and Stations, or CACTUS. We are pleased to welcome back to Telile 24/7, Vicki Hogarth. Thank you for joining us from St. Andrews today, Vicki.
Good to see you, Adam. I feel so privileged to be on your 150th episode. I can't believe it's been that many. Congratulations.
Well, it's always great to have you on deck to talk about the shared threads between Nova Scotia and New Brunswick in terms of community television. But it's even more special for me today because since the last time we've caught up, I found out from 3 different people, one from Richmond County, one from Port Hawkesbury, and one from the town of Mulgrave, that they really enjoy seeing you when we come on. As a matter of fact, I've had a couple of people say to me, we really like your show, but we also really like it when the woman from New Brunswick comes on. So yes, Vicki Hogarth, you've got a fan base here in the Strait area.
I dream of being a woman from New Brunswick in people's minds, so thank you so much for that. That's I always think of Telile as our sister station, and you and I have also been in the Local Journalism Initiative as it applies to community television since the get-go, which I think of you as my sibling in this program on so many levels too. So it is really neat to share those similarities with both you and your television station.
Well, Vicki, it's with that in mind that I'd like to begin our conversation for Telile 24/7 this time around by pointing to another big milestone that recently occurred for the Local Journalism Initiative. Specifically, Canadian Heritage has renewed the funding for the LJI program across Canada for another 3 years. And as someone who's been involved for a long time, just as I have and just as Telile Community Television has, we're wondering how you feel about this renewal.
Oh, I don't even know if relief is a fair enough word, but it was definitely a huge relief to all of us. I think that anyone who works in media knows that, so often in your career, how many times are you worried about the future of maybe whether it's your job or whether it's the outlet you're working at? There's been so many times in my life that I've had to encounter places being shut down and everyone leaving at once, or having positions let go at different outlets. It's been a decline since I started in this industry, and it's definitely, I think, an industry you only get into if you truly love it and have that calling to be a journalist. But when you have an opportunity to be a part of a program like the Local Journalism Initiative, and then to find out it's renewed for 4 years. Hopefully that means it sticks around for 4 years, but it's so far, that's what we've been told. It feels at least a sense of security in journalism. 4-year renewal is a huge amount. is eons compared to other industries, right? So to say we're relieved, we've been, in just the 4 years that we've been a part of the program, been able to see this huge growth of our television station and the areas we're able to cover in a remote, rural, often overlooked part of Canada that bigger outlets don't always get the chance or have the manpower to cover. So it's been a blessing to see how we've really shaped our community for the better by having such a strong presence, and then adding to that through the LJI. When we first became a part of the program, it was just me who was the first journalist sponsor, but now we have Florence Mitchell, who does so much production, editing, and some on-camera work with us too, that we've been able to grow astronomically because of it, and focused on the stuff that really matters, all the civic issues of a community. So we have 4 different towns that we do council coverage for all across the Southwest. And sometimes those are more challenging. So we have an island, for instance, we do that for, but we have to involve the island in helping us with volunteers. But yeah, it's been an incredible ride to actually be a part of a program that brings news somewhere that didn't necessarily have it before or had a lack of it.
Well, while we're talking about the renewal of the LJI program, Vicki, we wanted to catch up with you about a topic that you recently discussed with our French language journalist here at Telile, Jacqueline Giroir. You and CHCO-TV station manager Patrick Watt recently appeared in Ottawa in front of a hearing being conducted by the CRTC, not just about the local journalism initiative, but also about Canada's new Online News Act, which monitors how news can be shared on social media. What was that experience like for you and Patrick?
We spoke to the success of the LJI in a community television setting, but a lot of what we were there to actually do was talk about stuff like the Online News Act and what you're now seeing Google paying $100 million into in terms of supporting Canadian news outlets. And so we were there to represent community television in the sense that we believe that community TV should receive a stake in that when they do implement that and Google pays into it. That's the same thing we've seen the Meta news ban on Facebook about. They don't believe they should be paying into anything in terms of their presence in Canada. So Facebook has opted out of even having news put on Facebook. So we were there to represent why community television is valid and why they deserve a cut of this pie that will be, at least in terms of Google, sliced up in the near future. And basically, we're arguing for the fact that we do the work we do. We're nonprofits. Community TVs were basically, people always ask me, and I wonder if you get this too, that are like, who's your owner? And I'm like, oh, we don't have an owner. We're nonprofit. We are essentially owned by the community. We have a board of directors. There's no executive making a ton of money off what decisions are made here. And there's no advertising dollars that are dictating what we're going to cover. There's no, if it bleeds, it leads approach to doing news. It really is, here's the news for these communities that matters. And advertising dollars doesn't factor into that. And trying to reach a bigger market doesn't factor into that, and lining an executive's pocketbooks never factors into that. And that to me is what the model should be actually going forward, because the crisis we're seeing in media is also never going to be solved just by Google paying $100 million. We have to rethink how we're doing this, because there really are a lot of people that don't feel served, a lot of people who aren't watching news anymore. And you see that when you have this technological shift in how people consume media and news, that you're losing people in the process of that. There's all these people thinking, oh, we have to go on TikTok. Well, no, you actually have to rethink everything and the model itself. So I think when you do something the way we do it, nonprofit, I mean, $100 million from Google might sound like a lot of money, but if you cut that up and give a huge portion of that to executives, that isn't a lot, actually. It should be going to places that are going to actually use that money, and whether they have a skeleton crew or a small but functional studio like we do, to actually bring as much information as they can to the people, then we deserve a part of that cut too. So we were in Ottawa more to speak to the fact that we're not only worthy of the money, in fact, maybe this is the way Canadians should be thinking about how to rebuild a media scene, because, people will even accuse the LJI of being a Band-Aid solution to a dying industry. So yes, at times, is it a Band-Aid? I think it's saving what it can save right now. But in the meantime, we also have to rethink how we put news together as a country. So we can diversify the media scene, which in all the wake of everything closing, becomes less and less. There's a high concentration of media ownership and a lot of small areas where the smaller news outlets are dying. So I really do think a place like Telile or a place like CHCO could be a model for a new way of doing things.
Yes, we've all had to change the way we've been sharing news on social media when it comes to community stations like this one. But by the same token, you went an extra step and changed your personal Facebook page to become the new way of connecting with CHCO-TV viewers and the general audience out there in Facebook land. Can you tell me what that experience has been like for you?
If you told me when I made that decision in August that 6 months later, can I do math right? 7 months later, I'd still be using my personal page as where I publish news. I would be shocked that it went on this long, because I was looking to what happened in Australia when Meta temporarily banned news outlets from posting. And that ban, and it was over a similar thing. The government asked them to pay into these newsrooms. They were publishing their content and it was being shared. They did. They made a deal, and it was a closed deal. It wasn't one that I think they made the deal with all the news outlets individually. So it was never really made public how much Facebook or Meta gave the news outlets. Whereas in Canada, when our government tried to do similar things, it was via the government. There were no sort of make these deals with the outlets themselves. So it's gone on and on. This is where we're at now, that it's still being blocked. And when I decided to publish on my page, my rationale behind that was that in the east coast of Canada, a lot of small communities already use Facebook a lot. They're so used to being ignored by bigger news outlets that they have their own Facebook groups. And we were lucky with CHCO because people were already using Facebook and had their own groups going. But because of our presence in the community, we really built our Facebook page up to be a hub. I can't tell you the number of people that would say that's what they do in the morning. They get their coffee. We share all of our content from TV, full episodes on Facebook. The news is on Facebook. Any update we have, if there's a storm coming, it doesn't matter what it is, but the full content of all our shows, we'd live stream. Council meetings, anything we were doing live was also live on Facebook. And the reason that we dealt with Facebook so heavily is because similar to Telile, we're carried by Bell across Canada. That's great. But Rogers has always limited us to Charlotte County. I don't know why. When we live in a province that is a news desert, they like to think that, we would only be relevant to Charlotte County, when in fact the whole province is rural. We're a tiny province. So what I'm saying in the southwest corner is relevant to anyone. In all of New Brunswick, you can drive anywhere here in a day. So that's been an issue in itself, and Rogers might have their own self-serving reasons for blocking where we are carried. But that said, I used Facebook to reach those people that wanted our channel and couldn't, maybe they lived just outside of Charlotte County. Or in some cases, it would just be having Shaw back when Shaw wouldn't carry us anywhere. So we were already dealing with the news giants out there who I don't think all Canadians are aware of how much. There's a reason why there's only a few that exist, these conglomerates, because they really at times will bully a small entity out of a place in the market. Even though we're a nonprofit and we're not trying to have the same market share, we're not operating like a private news outlet. But all that to say, I use Facebook so heavily to reach people that couldn't get our channel. And we're always used to, as you know, jumping through hoops. So Facebook wasn't a way. I never used it as clicks, which in, I think, places like, I remember a journalist friend of mine from CBC said, you won't be affected by the news block because it's a link tax. They don't want you to share links anymore, but you don't do that. You always upload all your content, put all your information directly in Facebook. So I was actually shocked when it happened that it was a full block on news. And that bothers me on so many levels, because the fact that Facebook can just turn off that information. If you want to block links from me promoting our own content to send people off Facebook, if that's really what they wanted to do, I mean, that's up to them. But when you block information from being shared, we've had a lot of devastating storms, as you know, even better than I do when you're part of the world. We've had a lot of storms this year that were quite devastating. We've had a lot of forest fires. We've had a lot of emergencies where it's nice to be able to reach people as quickly as you can. And Facebook, with that share ability, really makes that more possible sometimes. And But when it comes from a news outlet that people know has fact-checked the information they have and can be a trusted source of information, then they know if I say, okay, whatever it is, this road is closed, it doesn't matter what, or, the W.C. O'Neill is another shelter right now as we evacuate homes. If that comes from us, then they know it's trusted information that we got from trusted sources. And so when Facebook took that away, it raises so many questions to me about the future of information and the power of these tech giants to just turn it off if they want to, and what that means going forward. It's a little terrifying. But yeah, I mean, our viewers are so great that the moment I said come follow me instead, they just did. Because they were always used to following us. And I would say, please subscribe now to our YouTube. So thousands of them have now subscribed to our YouTube, following my page, and we just redirect them like we always have, because we are so used to jumping through hoops. But when it's like another one, and they come out of this, I mean, if you told me a year ago that this was going to happen, I wouldn't have believed you. But here we are, adjusting to yet another obstacle.
And in the meantime, you've gotten used to the idea of checking your Facebook notifications every morning and having it say something to the effect of, Vicki Hogarth has 500 replies to her status line.
Exactly. Yeah. And thank God I'm at a stage where my life is, I think my personal life is so boring. I have nothing that interesting to post. So my work is like basically my life anyway. So it doesn't, giving up my own space to put the news out is totally fine by me.
And of course, as members of the Local Journalism Initiative, and even as people working at a community TV station, you and I have had to find different ways to get the news out when things change abruptly, haven't we? I mean, you think about it, this is the 4th anniversary of Telile 24/7, and it's also the 4-year mark for many of the programs you've been working on at CHCO-TV, Vicki. But shortly after Telile 24/7 got underway in February of 2020, the whole world changed as the COVID-19 pandemic swept through and shut everything down.
Right. We started this program a month and a half before COVID-19 just hit. And suddenly we were all working from home or alone. I mean, we were such a small team back then. I was still here, but I was just here alone at this news desk.
All of this happened shortly before Florence Mitchell joined you as part of the LJI program at CHCO-TV. As a matter of fact, it was just you and station manager Patrick Watt working on the programs together.
Yes, so there are just two of us here. What are some of the stories you've been working on lately? What's keeping you busy?
Well, Vicki, as you might surmise from the weather you folks have gotten in New Brunswick, storm systems here in Cape Breton Island and northeastern Nova Scotia were among the bigger stories of the whole winter. We got over 100 centimeters of snow in many parts of Cape Breton Island and northeastern Nova Scotia on the first weekend of February. That was followed a week and a half later by another 20 to 30 centimeters of snow, as many people, especially those living along rural roads in Richmond County, were still digging their way out. As a matter of fact, I spoke to Mike Kellaway, who is the MP for Cape Breton-Canso, as part of my post-storm coverage for Telile 24/7. By the time I caught up with him about 3 or 4 days after the first big snowfall, he was still digging his way out of his driveway in Sydney River. So it's impacted all of us. Mike Kellaway was involved in a major way in another big story I was covering. The MP for Cape Breton-Canso is the Parliamentary Secretary for the Federal Minister of Fisheries and Oceans. And that person, Diane Laboutelier, announced that the Atlantic elver fishery, a very lucrative fishery involving baby eels, would be cancelled for 2024. It had already been cancelled by the previous minister, Joyce Murray, just a couple of weeks into the 2023 season. So there are some people around here and across the province that are not happy about that. We're continuing to follow that story. A lot of people in Isle Madame are not happy about the removal process taking place for the Port Royal Bridge. That's in Western Isle Madame, and it connects communities like Port Royal, St. Mary's, and Janvrin's Island, and forces people to be able to drive 1.3 kilometers to get to West Arishat on Highway 206. They have to take a detour through McEachern Road. Well, it turns out that the Public Works Department for Nova Scotia is planning to have the entire structure removed by April 15th. That wound up in significant activity on Facebook, not just for a Port Royal Bridge group that was set up and attracted nearly 200 members in just over a week, but it also involved a lot of activity on our own Telile Facebook page in one of the more successful sharings of news coverage that we've had on the Facebook group for Telile as well. We're also keeping an eye on a joint public council meeting that is expected to be held within the coming weeks between two of the municipalities we cover, Richmond County and the town of Port Hawkesbury. There has been some consternation on the town side of the agenda, however, as it seems that Richmond officials are refusing to allow discussion about a revised funding formula for a Port Hawkesbury-based pool to be part of that joint public council session. That's the Straight Area Pool. It's based at a high school site in Port Hawkesbury known as Sarek. One town councillor has now gotten his fellow councillors' support in Port Hawkesbury to take a look at charging out-of-town residents higher fees to use the pool. So we expect to see where that's going in the coming weeks. And one of the biggest news stories that I've been following as part of Telile 24/7 is the resignation of Richmond MLA Trevor Boudreau from the provincial cabinet. Boudreau was named the Minister of Community Services and the Minister responsible for the Office of Ill-New Affairs just this past September. However, in mid-February, Boudreau announced that he was leaving these two posts for personal and health reasons. He's offered no further official comment other than a prepared statement to Telile Community Television or other local media. We're keeping an eye on this, and it's interesting how these things go, Vicki, because shortly after Trevor Boudreau stepped down from cabinet, a member of the legislature who had been serving for the Nova Scotia Liberal Party and crossed the floor to join the PCs, Brendan Maguire, was inducted into cabinet shortly after he made that decision to join the governing PC caucus. I know this is something that you've seen happen in New Brunswick. As a matter of fact, I recall that the People's Alliance of New Brunswick, a rather short-lived party, wound up collapsing to a degree because the leader of the party, Chris Austin, and the party's only other MLAs joined the PC party not all that long ago. So it's interesting sometimes to see the common threads between politics in Nova Scotia and New Brunswick as we see members of the legislature crossing the floor to join other parties.
Yeah, I mean, it's happened. I could tell you just from the current premier's cabinet, Robert Gauvin, who was his deputy, was the deputy premier. He walked the floor, and this is, I think it was pre-COVID. He walked the floor over what I think was proposed rural hospital shutdowns that may have been proposed. I don't think they were ever implemented. It might have been about, I'm trying to remember now, ER reduced hours and things like that. So he walked the floor and went Liberal. He was PC and he was the deputy premier at the time. And then we've seen actually Dominic Carty, who was the education minister, get kicked out of his caucus and become independent. And this is all in the same, and we've seen some resignations lately as well, some effective immediate, some just saying they're not reoffering. Arlene Dunn recently, who was I want to say she had 5 portfolios in cabinet, quite a lot, very well respected. She resigned from cabinet and as MLA effective immediately. And yeah, you see it all the time. And I mean, I don't know what's the right answer. Should someone be able to, we saw Jenna Atwin, the MP, leave Greens and go Liberal federally, who's up in Fredericton. This was, in really recent history too, within the last 5 years. So yeah, I've seen it happen a lot in rural New Brunswick. And, I don't know, I think about it a lot because we've seen similar things. There's been question marks at times, when, for instance, Higgs, not the past election, but the one before, the first time he was elected, he only was the deciding, he won by 1 seat, really. So there were questions, even at that time, would someone consider walking the floor? And you know who the two they were looking at in speculation were Dominic Carty, who had been with the NDP before he was PC. Now he's independent, and now he started a new federal party. And with Robert Gauvin, I think his family had a long history PC, but his riding could have gone either way. So then he did eventually go walk the floor and become Liberal. So you see it happen. I think a lot of people were disappointed too from a Green perspective when New Brunswick had that 1 federal seat. And it showed the growth of that party. And then Jenna Atwin went and became Liberal. And that was over issues within the Green Party that they were having at the time federally. So, yeah, you see it happen. I don't know. It's hard to say. I think what's your opinion on it, whether it should be done or not? I don't know. I think that there's a huge question about, like, who voted for you? That wasn't what they signed up for. So, I mean, I think of it from perspective of a voter. I've never run for office, so I always think, well, what did I vote this person in to do? And I mean, it seems like something that is could be really misleading to people that voted for you to then walk the floor and join a party whose values they might not share. They voted for you believing one thing. I think going independent and walking away from a party, if let's say you did run on a platform and you feel your party is maybe betraying that platform, I don't know. Should you be able to leave the party? I don't know. I think so. What do you think?
Well, this is certainly not the first time that this particular type of floor crossing has happened in Nova Scotia. We've seen members change parties for many years, as a matter of fact. The interesting thing about Brendan Maguire, who had served in the Liberal governments of Stephen McNeil and Ian Rankin for 8 years over 2 terms, is that Maguire felt that his personal experience with many aspects of the community services portfolio, including his time in foster care and other parts of the system, would make him able to take on the difficulties that we're seeing within the community services portfolio these days, including tent encampments around Grand Parade in Halifax. The Halifax Regional Municipality just recently turned off power and water to the sites, as they've been telling the members of the public that have been staying at Grand Parade that they are to be evicted. Only one tent owner was still there at last count, but it looks like the plan is to try to get people who are living in tents, who are homeless or underhoused, to stay in shelters that are being set up in different parts of not only Halifax but all across the province. A new public housing unit just established in Port Hawkesbury, announced by Minister John Lohr for Municipal Affairs and Housing, and we're still trying to get some details on that one as well. But, you know, in terms of whether I feel that it's appropriate for members to step down, you do have to ask yourself the question, do these members actually believe in the party that only recently they may have been criticizing? Brendan Maguire was one of the staunchest Liberal critics of the PC party before he joined cabinet under Premier Tim Houston. So you do have to wonder if people can leave behind those misgivings about a government or about another party that they're about to join and simply turn on a dime and accept a whole new party and a whole new platform. But I honestly don't think we're going to see changes to the legislation that currently governs this type of thing to insist that MLAs that want to join a new party first resign their seat and then run in a by-election under the new party banner. I have a feeling that the political parties that currently exist, especially those in government, are not going to see that as politically expedient. So I think we could be waiting a long time for changes like that to occur. But I note that you bring up the example of Gauvin in northern New Brunswick leaving the PCs for the Liberal Party, and I imagine that had to be a big blow to Premier Blaine Higgs in New Brunswick, because Gauvin was the only PC MLA that was serving in the northern and mostly Acadian parts of New Brunswick, and I imagine that losing that lone PC voice in a sea of Liberal MLAs and neighboring constituencies didn't sit well with Mr. Higgs.
I think he recuperated from Robert Gauvin really well, but where he's at now, that's going to be a challenge for him, is that going into last summer, there were 6 of his caucus members that voted with the Liberals against changes to Policy 713, which is it's a policy for schools to follow that just provides the basic safety and rights for LGBTQ plus kids in school, and protective of gender identity politics too. So there were some changes made to that by Bill Hogan, who replaced Dominic Carty as the education minister when Dominic Carty was kicked out of the party. It's the whole thing. You'd think that we would be sleepy in the Maritimes. No, there's never a dull moment in provincial politics. So there were 6 of Higgs' caucus that voted with the Liberals. and it became very much a loyalty issue. It put cracks in his party for sure. There's, many of those six are, I mean, when you look at it, it's people that are not running again. But the six that voted, I think there's all these question marks about whether Higgs would even re-sign their papers so that they could offer again. So it put cracks in the party, and that I don't know. I mean, it's going to make this next election, which will be this year, our next provincial election. There was rumors that he was going to call it back in November, and then that didn't happen. So we're looking around the fall of this year, seeing what happens. I don't know. That was a rolling the dice moment, if you ask me. What he did with Policy 713, and there were, six rebels, as we call them now, that voted with the Liberals.
And one of those six PC rebels in New Brunswick is actually right in your coverage area in Charlotte County, is that right?
Yes, that's Andrea Anderson-Mason. She's with Fundy the Isles, St. John West. It's one of the, if we focus on two ridings, it's St. Croix, which is where I'm in, St. Andrews, St. Stephen, and that goes up to Lawrence Station area. And then Fundy the Isles, St. John West is, and then Campobello Island's in St. Croix, and then Fundy the Isles, St. John West goes all the way exactly to St. John West, has St. George, Grand Manan, if people know those islands, Deer Island, and that's Andrea's riding. And so I mean, what does her future look like? She's going to do a show here to talk to us about it as we get closer to the election. And what that means for her, whether, that means, I don't know what it means for her yet. I can't wait to find out. I know that at my end of year sit down with Premier Higgs, I did ask him if he would sign the papers of the rebels. And he's usually pretty direct with me, but he didn't give me a clear answer on that. It was more maybe they won't want to reoffer anyway, kind of a thing. And we've seen Jeff Carr also was one of the six rebels. He won't be reoffering. There are people that are not reoffering, like Mike Holland, who did vote with Higgs on that. But it was definitely a line when the Policy 713 vote happened that it really, to me, was the start of the crumbling of, he at the time seemed like he had a really strong hold on the province. And then that's just when it started to seem like, oh, maybe not. We'll see. I don't know what would happen. If you ask me what's going to happen in the next election, I really don't know. You see the Liberals really lining up they're doing all their nomination events, but they've been doing them since the fall because they were expecting to be ready for an election in November. So they've had all this time now. They were preparing for a snap election, and now it looks like it's just going to happen when it was originally scheduled to happen, but they're ready. So I'm really curious to cover it. It's been interesting. It's a door-to-door province, though, which I imagine like so much of Nova Scotia is too, that if you're a good candidate, you can win. Like people will vote for you, the person, if you go door to door and people really believe in your platform and the skill set that you'll bring to accomplish those goals. And if they see that you're a person who's true to your word here, people will vote for. You saw that with, it would be Michelle Conroy who beat Kevin Vickers when she was People's Alliance in New Brunswick. They think they call her the Dragon Slayer because people still voted with her. Because that's in her riding. She's very popular. So, I don't think that New Brunswick necessarily is a party province. Because if you are a strong enough candidate, you can win people over here. And that's a really special thing to cover.
Now, to help put that in perspective for our Telile viewers, you talk about Michelle Conroy, who was running for the People's Alliance of New Brunswick at the time, defeating Liberal Kevin Vickers in that riding. He wasn't just a Liberal candidate, he was actually the leader of the Liberal Party in New Brunswick, running in 2020. And before that, he had served as the high-profile Sergeant-at-Arms for the Federal Parliament in Ottawa. And many of our viewers might remember it was almost 10 years ago that this happened, that Kevin Vickers, the Sergeant-at-Arms, used a firearm to bring down a gunman that had made his way into the Parliament buildings after shooting and killing Private Nathan Cirillo, who was a guard over at the National War Memorial in Ottawa. So it's just interesting to think that Mr. Vickers did so poorly in that election, even losing his own seat in New Brunswick in 2020, given what a high profile and what a profound role he had played back in 2014 during what many see as a terrorist attack.
And she'd be one to watch. As you were saying before, she's a perfect example. Will she win this coming election? And she'll be running as a progressive conservative for the first time. She probably will. I mean, there's not much I can gamble on the next coming election, because I feel like there's still so much to take in, so many moves that can still be made to follow. But with her, I mean, she's one of those ones that I'd say, yeah, she could even switch parties. And I'm not that familiar with her riding. It's far away from where we are. So I don't follow it unless it's like a big story that impacts all of New Brunswick. I don't follow it as closely as St. Croix and Funny the Isles. But I would guess, knowing her support, that she'll, be right back in again. So it's interesting when you live in a place like this where people can really get to know their candidates quite well. And if you have a platform like Telile, or you have a CHCO and you can interview all the candidates, we always do, people really can make that the best decision for them. And that doesn't have to be voting for a party. It can be voting for a person.
And you mentioned interviewing all the candidates, Vicki. That's something we do here at Telile Community Television as well, not just for the provincial candidates, but also for federal candidates and for the municipal elections. We expect to be busy on that over the next few months, because the deadline for running in this fall's municipal elections in October is going to be coming very early in September 2024. So we're keeping an eye on that, seeing who's going to run again, who's going to reoffer, and who's going to be a first-time candidate. And it's interesting to talk about elections, because I expect New Brunswickers will be going to the polls at roughly the same time. You've talked a bit about Policy 713 and the changes being made to that policy, that school principals and administrators have the right to contact parents of those who have changed their name and changed their gender identity, instead of keeping it secret and within the school setting. Do you feel that Policy 713 is going to be a ballot question for the New Brunswick election, Vicki? Do you think people might be inclined to vote one way or another because of the decisions that the Higgs government took on this particular issue?
It's funny, when you do the jobs that you and I do, you think that everyone's following every issue the same way you are. And chances are they're not. I can ask a lot of people about, I'm surprised by the number of people that do know about it and are following it closely. I think, when people go to the polls, it often comes down to, especially at the times that we're living in, right? It comes down to your bills a lot of the time. As much as many of us want to hope that social issues really do get people to the polls as well, I think that the average person is really struggling to just get by now. So when a government can offer them, in their mind, whether it's tax relief or benefits of some sort, or just, I think sometimes that's where the average voter is looking, and maybe 713, they might not be fully informed about what it means, what the whole implications are of changes like that. You can look at them and say, oh, it's not a big deal. Parents should be informed. But if you talk to other experts, and I recommend anyone who's listening to this and wants to learn more, we just had Dr. John Dornan on. He's the former CEO of Horizon Health, with the, I guess you could see, he's the one that I think he sued the province for $2 million too. That's a whole, Google that. That's another story. But he's an endocrinologist, one of the leading ones in the Maritimes. And so he came on a show I do called Southwest Magazine a couple weeks ago to do a full half-hour show on what gender affirming care is, just so I just said, well, I don't even really necessarily want to talk about Policy 713, because the changes they made to it sound very small. But what I wanted to do is sit down and talk to someone. Let's just demystify what gender affirming care is, who seeks it, what does it mean, what are the steps along the way, and then let's look at how small a percentage of the population does this actually affect. Everyone's obsessing over these, oh, it's no big deal to call parents. Well, it might be for someone. It might be, and it's a very small percentage of the population that we have to protect. So why are these changes potentially damaging to that small population that's already highly discriminated against? So the idea with having Dr. Dornan on is because when someone is a group of people are discriminated against, it often has to do with the fact that people just don't understand, so they judge and project ideas. So Dr. Dornan came on to just answer questions for half an hour about what gender affirming care is, and when these treatments are sought, how they're sought, what's the process, what is someone who is a teenager really going through. They're not like what people assume is happening isn't. I mean, there's certain stages if you are transitioning that would only happen when you were an adult anyway. You can make those decisions when you're an adult, and there's other decisions you can make when you're younger. Why are those decisions important when you're young? Are there any kind of health complications that come with those decisions? So we walked through all those things, because I think sometimes debating policy 713, it's fine, but if we don't know what we're really talking about, then it's unfair to the group of people that it actually affects, which is not most of us. So, I mean, I think that's when I take my job and think, what is the best thing I can do right now? Is it going to the legislature and covering the latest thing that happened there, or is it bringing in an expert who can bring knowledge to the people around us and then let them inform their own decisions and opinions, but from a place of like fully understanding something? And when we can have people understand something that they didn't know before, that, you know, eventually reduces stigma as well. So there's a lot of power in the TV that you and I do that might not be prime time across North America, but in that ripple effect of what you can bring to a small community, and then those people can bring to everyone they know, it's extremely powerful in the most humbling of ways. So we take that responsibility really seriously. And yeah, when I'm covering stuff like 713, I mean, it can all seem so, you know, ideas and, you know, people in the legislature making decisions. But when you break it down for how does this affect my community and what information do they need, sometimes like a different way of covering it comes to you.
So there's still a lot of story to be written in terms of the political scene in New Brunswick, Vicki. And in the meantime, we're just curious, what kind of stories are you covering for CHCO-TV under the LJI program these days? And what kind of programs are you involved in over there?
Do a news break on Tuesday, and we do council for St. Andrews, St. Stephen, Grand Manan, and Eastern Charlotte. Eastern Charlotte's an amalgamated community. It's St. George, essentially, and then the surrounding communities. So that stays regular. I'm launching a new morning talk show. No, I want to say next week. I'm going to say it's in 2 weeks, called Good Day from the Bay. So you're welcome to come be on it anytime. That one is going to be more of like celebration of the community and really highly timely content that's more about openings and festivals and what's going on in the community. So it's a lighter show. Most of what I do right now, I find, is like, it's not that it's heavy, but it's a lot of politics, social issues, and things that I definitely enjoy covering. But you miss that outlet that really is just saying, hey, look, there's this cool music festival going on this weekend, and also this new restaurant opened on Deer Island, and things like that. So it's nice to have a new outlet to do those kind of shows, and also an hour-long show. Otherwise, everything keeps us busy in terms of just covering the news. I know that everyone has been covering homelessness is obviously an international issue. To see homelessness, though, in our part of the world where we're very rural, and we're small towns, to the degree that we're seeing it now, is something that I'm covering almost weekly. Whether it's the need for some of these small towns of just a few thousand people that have a homeless shelter, which was not the case even 10 years ago. The need's there now. So I'm covering things like that regularly. And I think pre-COVID, I don't know if I keep asking myself that, like, how much are times changing, the cost of living, and the challenges we face. It seems so exacerbated right now for everyone. And for instance, I filmed a show this morning with the New Brunswick SPCA. We had the executive director from Fredericton come down, but also the local representative from the animal shelter in St. Stephen. And they said, just to show you how this is affecting. I mean, we can take homelessness as one issue that is very emblematic of hard times, but you think of how that trickles down into other places. Having the SPCA there, really my motivation for the show was just about, they have this new campaign for your next pet. It's really about responsible pet ownership. But what they said today is that this is the highest year on record for pet abandonment, as well as the need for the SPCA to help people out who've adopted pets that now can't afford to take care of them, so they have to provide food or any kind of resources that they can. And so they're seeing these record-breaking years. When you think about, okay, homelessness, I find there's a lot of blame when you read comments about why people are in situations that they're in. But then you see how it's also affecting, our local shelters, cost of living. Yes, sure. There's a number of issues at play in the ecosystem of why so many things are struggling right now. But yeah, so I could say I'm covering homelessness, but it really is this bigger picture ecosystem of issues that when you see them exposed in a rural area, those are people like there's a lot of people who are homeless and I know them, and that's a really impossible thing to look away from. I think when you live in a city, sometimes it's easy to just, lock the door and go home and not necessarily have to think about, you can feel sad, but you can close the door. And I don't think that's as easy to do. And I wouldn't want it to be easy in a small town. I take my job seriously telling the news, but because I'm so connected here, I want to be solution-based in how we cover things, to shine light on things in a meaningful way that helps people figure out how, as a community, we can come together and do the best we can to alleviate the problems that we can, and then find a better approach to the ones that we can't seem to fix. But I don't know. I can say I'm covering certain topics, but I think when you are a community channel, even the way we cover them is special. As it is with you, you're part of the community. So what's in the news that you would see at, a legacy media company that is feeding a bigger network doesn't have that same community attachment as the way we cover stuff.
And as you're talking about legacy media, Vicki, it has been a difficult time for those who are caught up in the shifting sands of journalism in our area. We have seen, of course, thousands of people laid off by CTV and Bell Media over the past couple of months, including longtime journalists. Many local broadcasts have been canceled as well. CBC is preparing for a number of layoffs both locally and nationally this month as well. We should be hearing more word about that soon. I, of course, know that you're familiar with what happened with Saltwire Media just this past week. The media corporation, which owns, among other newspapers, the Chronicle Herald and the Cape Breton Post, the last two daily newspapers in Nova Scotia, has announced it is filing for creditor protection, several $1 million in debt right now. So, in the middle of all this, Vicki Hogarth, how do you feel as a journalist trying to cover community stories for a community station and seeing the landscape shifting around you? What has it been like for you the last couple of months?
I think, the sad truth is that it's been happening my whole career. So is it happening on a different level now? I don't know. It's been, when I started my career in journalism, I worked in magazines and they were a dying thing. And so I remember that phase being like, okay, where do we go next? Okay, we learn online. And then you realize online isn't the answer too. They're not paying writers well, so they're not doing good stories. There's like so many things wrong with that. The ecosystem of media is another thing I could critique all day as well. But it's been a constant thing. But I think what we're seeing now that is the most troubling is the erosion of news. And news in general, not just local news. Local news is the most crippling thing. When people don't know what's happening in their own community, they can't make informed decisions. And that's a terrifying thing. And then we saw the concentration of news in cities, but even that's starting to dissipate now. And, and you look at someone like Poilievre is likely to win the next federal election, and he's very much taken a stance against CBC. So could we see further cuts to CBC in the years ahead? Likely. So what does that mean too? And I'm not saying that, I'm saying that neutrally. That's just the likelihood of what's to come, right? In terms of the Canadian media scene. I think it's just weirdly built into you as a journalist to always be there's no job security. I've never had job security. Even here, this is probably the most secure I've felt because we're such a huge part of the fabric of the community, even though I've jumped through more hoops here trying to keep CHCO alive. The community embraces us because we're doing something that's so local and so nonprofit. That I know that the thirst, because of that, I know that thirst for local news and local programming and local content is everywhere because they embrace it here in rural New Brunswick. Everything we do is so appreciated. But I'm still scared of, as a journalist, I know that the best thing for my own career is to have more media. Not just, I don't want to say competition, but there needs to be a diversity of voices and a diversity of platforms so that we are all strengthened by that. I don't want to be the last man standing. It's even if you know you're secure, it bothers me to see Saltwire. We see, everything that happened this week with Saltwire. What does that mean for the East Coast in terms of newspapers? And we saw our own newspaper scene, and we used to think it was bad that most of the newspapers in New Brunswick in English were owned by the Irvings. Well, now they're Postmedia owned, so we've seen them get smaller, their newsrooms get smaller too in the last few years, and so it bothers me to and their papers, that comes out 3 days a week now here. It's scary. It's sad. I'm not scared. I'm scared for how misinformed that we will be. And then you add to that the fact that you can't even share news on Facebook. So a place that people do visit regularly, as popular as social media is, and I'm not against social media, it has so many benefits. But if that's the main place people are consuming information and there's no verified news on there, that's really scary. That's why I've been using my own page. At least I know that we've, fact checked everything. And then our community knows that too. It's on my page, but it's our workaround. It's such a scary thing to wonder where we're going to go and how information and people, there will be information wars, and I don't want to go down that road. But I can see that being the next warfare will be, it already is. We're already seeing that happening in the world today. People know that, information is so key, but Canada is such a tricky country to cover properly anyway. We're so spread out that it's so hard to have media placed in the more rural parts. So I feel particularly proud that we exist where we do and how we do. But I know we're an anomaly already, and that makes me sad because any erosion you're seeing is erosion from something that's already broken. And it's really, really scary. And no one's going to know, no one's going to know the impact of it till it's too late. And I don't know, unless we really start rebuilding it right now. That's why I'm very passionate about the idea that other communities could look to what you're doing and what we're doing and maybe take it on themselves to maybe you won't be able to get on TV the same way we are. But there would be a way to, these days at least, you can publish video so easily that I hope some other communities take the type of work that you're doing and that we're doing and maybe just do it for themselves. Because if you can't count on these big conglomerates, and you can't, to properly produce news anymore and to not make cuts every time they can, then maybe it is time for communities to just take it upon themselves to build their own nonprofit newsrooms. I don't know that it can be done fast enough, but it would be the best thing we could do in the face of what we're watching, because I don't know how it's going to slow down. Even with things like the LGI, I think it really does help hold on to some of the places that are strong and can get through this. But yeah, how do you feel? Are you worried for what's to come?
Well, I won't lie to you, Vicki, and I won't lie to our viewers here on Telile either. It's been very difficult for me as someone who's been either a full-time or freelance journalist in this area for 31 years to watch what's been happening to traditional media. I've seen friends of mine and longtime colleagues of mine who work for different stations and different newspapers either get laid off or have their job security threatened Even the radio station that first hired me in 1993 doesn't have full-time news reporters working right out of the station anymore. Ownership changes have meant things have really shifted in terms of newspapers, radio, TV. So many things have happened, and so many things are happening right now that devalue our profession. And I really do fear for the future of our profession. But I'm ready to try to change and adapt, as I've done with Telile Community Television right from the COVID days on out, to be able to bring the news to all of our viewers and to the surrounding communities, even those that don't watch Telile regularly. But I have to say, Vicki, as we're winding down here, I do want to try to end things on a positive note. And I really appreciate the way that you get out and you're a part of your community. And this kind of goes back to something that you used to do when you were working in magazines and television before coming to CHCO-TV. You used to be on red carpets for everything from the Emmy Awards to Fashion Week in Milan. And I understand that you got a chance to go back to the red carpet right in St. Andrews as we celebrated the recent Academy Awards. Can you tell me a bit about that?
Yes, my previous life, when I worked in magazines, when I was very young, I used to go to like the Emmys and Fashion Week, cover red carpets. And it was a fun event we had here in St. Andrews where a friend of mine who is the manager at Drew Haven Town and Country, he and the owners put together a benefit for the local food bank, which was a glamorous Oscars party in town. So while we might not be in Hollywood, we brought Hollywood to St. Andrews by the Sea by having life-size cutouts of stars and an Oscars pool, and everyone, it was a black tie affair. So it was kind of fun, especially in March when you're just kind of sick of winter. I don't get sick of winter till the very end. And then in the end, you don't want to deal with it anymore. So it was a nice excuse to get dolled up. And I was more surprised by the men. There were so many tuxedos. It was fantastic. And it was just like a big screen event, and we had a blast. Yeah, it was a nice excuse to celebrate something kind of silly and have a nice night out.
Well, Vicki, it's been wonderful to see your Oscar-worthy enthusiasm, not just on our TV screens and on our social media channels, but also at any Cactus or LJI event and right here on Telile 24/7. It's been great to have you back. Thank you for helping me to celebrate the 30th anniversary of Telile Community Television, the 4th anniversary of Telile 24/7, and our 150th 24/7 episode. Thank you so much, and keep up the great work in St. Andrews.
Well, thank you for letting us be a part of the celebrations of your 150th episode and 30 years of Telile. Here is to 30 more. I'll see you soon, Adam.
Anytime, my friend. Vicki Hogarth is the news director for CHCO-TV, Charlotte County TV in St. Andrews, New Brunswick, and a fellow member of the Local Journalism Initiative as overseen by the Canadian Association of Community Television Users and Stations. And special thanks to CHCO-TV's Patrick Watt and Florence Mitchell for their technical and production assistance on this interview. And there you have it. That wraps up episode number 150 of Telile 24/7. Thank you for tuning in, not just this week, but for the past 4 years. If you have any thoughts about what you've seen over the past hour, or you'd just like to make a suggestion for a future edition of Telile 24/7, I'd love to hear them. You can contact me directly. My phone number is 902-625-8863, and you can reach me by email using the address adamjrcook, cook with an E, @gmail.com. You can also contact Telile Community Television directly with your ideas and your comments. The station phone number in Arichat is 902-226-1928, and the best email address to use is telile@telile.tv.